Welcome back, everyone, from the break. I would now like to invite Professor Hahnkyu, Dean of the College of International Studies at Kyung University, to chair our next session, United States, China, Japan, and the Korean Peninsula. Prof. Park, please.
Okay, welcome to session 2, United States, China, Japan, and the Korean Peninsula. Okay, I am Hahnkyu Park, professor from Kyung International College, Republic of Korea. Okay, so we have 3 presenters in this session. First, we have the Professor Jaewoo, Department of Chinese Studies at Kyung University. He is actually one of the best and renowned, Korean experts on China and Korea. Okay, thank you for joining us today. And then the second presenter is Professor Sunil Sunil. Okay, he's talking about the Japan and North Korea relations during the Trump's second term. And thirdly, we have the Professor Haruko Satoh from Osaka University. She is also one of the best, the experts on Korean Peninsula, Korea-Japan relations, okay, in Japan. So she will talk about the trilateral cooperation between United States, Japan, and South Korea. Okay, let's go. Okay, first with Professor Jaewoo. Okay, are you ready? So you have the 15 minutes. You have to finish 15 minutes.
Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it.
Okay, let's go.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to thank EAI for inviting me to this wonderful conference. And I understand you have a new director with whom I haven't met yet, but I'll say hello to you later. It's a wonderful conference as usual. I've been a regular participant and I'm quite honored to be that. Today, I was assigned to this topic, Trump 2.0 and US-China strategic competition. But before I go in, I think we had a wonderful first session and congratulatory remarks earlier. And I think I'd like to share some of my 2 cents regarding some of the remarks made in this earlier sessions. First, I think someone was being sarcastic about strategic patience of the Obama administration, but I don't think it wasn't that bad of a strategy at all, considering at the time period. And I think we need to reassess. I think it's time to reassess the Obama administration's strategic patience, because it has definitely taken a toll on it was quite effective. It's not because, the United States didn't do anything about denuclearization of North Korea, but instead it basically, was fully concentrating on sanctioning North Korea. And I think the sanction policy has been quite effective. It was to gradually choke North Korea and isolate it. And now I think we all know the results. I think this is one of the main factors that compel North Korea to side with Russia these days. And also not only the economic effects, but the military aspect. Looking at it from the military aspect, in 2022, North Korea test fired 65 missiles in 1 year, and it takes a lot of money there. But in 2024, it decreased to 20 times. So I think it's telling, the effect of, sanction policy that Obama administration concentrated under the name of strategic patience, and I think it deserves a reassessment in hindsight. And with respect to Trump and Kim summit, I don't think, I'm pretty skeptic about it, because we all know what Trump is all about. He wants to win a Nobel Peace Prize, right? And I don't think Trump-Kim summit is going to win him a Nobel Peace Prize. So, and he has limited terms. He has only 4 years under his belt. And, even solving Ukrainian war and, Middle East, I think that's a heavy duty there. So I think he wants to win the champion belt under his name, and that's what he's striving for. If he's really, going after Nobel Peace Prize. So, I think North Korea and U.S. Summit 2.0 I don't think it's feasible. Plus, there's a deep distrust, especially, in North Korea with respect to Trump, and I would say probably vice versa too, but especially, if we go back to, Trump 1.0, 2017, they were having a chicken game there with all the military threats and surgical strikes and so forth, and preventive strikes. And then all of a sudden, 2018, everything just turned around upside down, 180 degree. And we saw summits, but we saw nothing happen, at the Hanoi summit in 2019. And guess what happened in 2019? Trump went back to square one, and he forcefully, coercively extradite I believe there were two North Korean individuals for violating American sanctions, who were put on the entity list from Malaysia. And you're all from Southeast Asia, most of them. So you're probably aware of that incident. And I think that incident has driven a big political wedge between the United States and North Korea. And I don't think Kim Jong-un forgot about that incident. It cost him to break off ties with Malaysia. And I don't think we can underestimate the effect of that incident. Okay, going to my talk here. Well, we say, Trump being a transactional leader. Is he? Haruko, my friend here, and I don't think we agree on that. I think she's going to elaborate a little bit more because, okay, I'll talk about that later in the next page. And, because I don't think Trump is anything but Biden. He's going to carry on a lot of Biden stuffs, and just like, Biden did with Trump 1.0 policies on China and the world. But there's some inconsistent aspects to it too, So I would say, differences between Trump and Biden. And I'd like to share some of my afterthoughts on this particular question. Okay, Trump being transactional, he has to be transactional because he has only limited terms, 4 years. He cannot rerun again in 2028. So in 4 years, he has to allow, he might have to achieve a lot, going back to his campaign trail. He promised a lot of things, and, but I'm not too sure what he wants to achieve. That's the question to me. Well, on the diplomatic and foreign policy front, definitely, American primacy, that's for sure. But how he's going to do that? I don't think he has new strategy. He was the one that laid the foundation of, Indo-Pacific strategy and all these visions for global, new NATO, inclusive of Asia Pacific countries, and he's done a lot back then. And basically, Biden just carried on, and Biden also, was more concrete about it. I think more concrete in the sense that he gave out a time period for this American primacy policy to be carried on for the next 10 years. If you remember, Biden administration came out with this report back in September 2022, saying the next 10 years is really critical and important for the United States in competition with China. And coincidentally, the month later, when there was a 20th CCP Congress was held, Xi Jinping also said the next year is really, really important to China. So, for the next 10 years up until, 2033, the United States and China all wants to be better than the other. So, but at the same time, for American national interests, Trump because his limited term, he could be fixated on immediate and, you know, quick benefits. So he's going to be really strategic about it and tactical about it. But is he going to, you know, undermine the American long-term strategy, ideology, principles? I don't think so. It is built on that foundation. It's just an extension of it in just different uniform. So I don't think, you know, Trump 2.0 is anything but Biden, but he's going to carry on. He's going to inherit a lot, and he's going to be really consistent there. But in some domains, he'll be inconsistent. So looking at it from consistency perspective, you know, we all know that, you know, Trump laid down the basic framework for U.S.-China competition, all began in, you know, 2007 with the NSS, the release of NSS, in which, you know, he explicitly defined the relationship as in competition. And beginning from 2020, you know, we all know that, you know, the United States started to perceive and define China as a threat. And the end goal is to definitely uphold liberal international order, although, you know, Trump is not too explicit about it in his statements, but you know, and the premises of the order is through alliance and, you know, universal values and the values that America upholds in its foreign policy. So ideology and values and principles also matter to Trump and also, you know, in long terms for the United States. So going back to, you know, Trump 1.0, we have seen the United States strategic interest in priority order, as I laid out in the slide here. Fentanyl is definitely the #1 case here, and agriculture is #2. Definitely global supply resilience. You know, Trump administration came into shock how bad the American manufacturing, you know, foundation was at the advent of you know, COVID-19 and, you know, the Ukrainian war. They couldn't even get a hold of, you know, their own mask, you know, because they have no raw materials or, you know, producers at all. And he wants to hold the, you know, lead and in high tech. And then comes China, you know. So, you know, definitely, you know, American national strategic interest is in the top tier. And I would say China comes in next, and all defense of Taiwan and so forth. And the alliance, I would say, is probably the bottom. Yeah. And you look at from China's interest perspective here, and I laid out the China's strategic interest against the United States in priority order again. And definitely since the foundation of the PRC is reducing, you know, foreign influence from its periphery. And then Taiwan Strait, territorial dispute, and, you know, cooperation in high tech, because, you know, China also moved into fourth industry era. And then, you know, reform of the global order and institutions and so forth, and achieving one of the means to realize that end is democracy, upholding democracy of international relations. And another means would be BRI and the national mission, and, you know, national goals are also stated in the bottom. So inconsistency, you know, the difference between Trump 2.0 and Biden administration is, I think, the outstanding and one of the most salient aspect is Trump administration is going to apply all around high tariffs, including, you know, allies and friends. I think that's unfortunate. And there's going to be a lot of discriminatory measures even against allies and friends. And definitely economic interest and terms will dictate the alliance relationship. And you like to build or expand his influence, or American influence, through deal making. And if he doesn't see any benefits to the United States, he'll just, you know, walk out. And if there's a benefits to the United States, then he'll even take extreme measures. And what it means for Korea, I think it's a blessing in disguise. It's like, you know, two side of one coin. Okay, blessing in disguise because, you know, okay, when I heard, you know, IRA, Inflation, you know, Reduction Act in the United States, or CHIPS Act, you know, during the Biden administration, I raised my two hands and I say, long live Biden, because it's a very fortunate situation for Korea that Biden administration created, because America cannot produce or manufacture any of all these elements, that was included in the IRA, and they banned using Chinese products. And what does that mean? It's going to open up greater markets to Korean products. And we should have welcomed it. But instead, we were all obsessed with whether we can get the, subsidies from the American government. And I thought that was unfortunate. And a chance to build stronger alliance, I think, definitely, because, people worry about Trump raised the question of, a lot more, cost sharing on South Korea. But I said, be it, we should counter with a much stronger attitude. Okay, if you're going to raise it, although, during the Biden administration, we worked out a deal for the next 5 years. And if you want to rebuke it, go ahead. And if you want to withdraw your forces or, and so forth, just like Dirty Harry says, go ahead, make my day. It's going to be a loss to the United States, and especially in the context of Indo-Pacific strategy. And we know what ROK-US alliance strategically means to the, American Quad or, Indo-Pacific strategy. And a chance to enhance Korea's global stake, I say absolutely. I'm really optimistic on this question too, because like I said, there's a clear division of labor and newly aspired, global supply chain. America, supplying with raw technologies, and Japan and European nations supplying all these equipments and parts and so forth. And Korea and Japan are the lone manufacturers here. So there's a clear division of labor, and I think it's going to only raise more stakes for Korea. And I think, we might be able to build a bigger stake in this American-led global strategy under Trump administration. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Professor Choo. So next speaker, okay, Professor Kim Sunil. Okay, he's talking about the Yeshiva's policy toward North Korea during the term 2. Okay, let's go.
Thank you very much for introducing me. I'm Sunil Kim from Kyung University, and very nice to meet you. And thank you for inviting me. So let me see. Actually, I prepared for like 30 pages of slides. And I knew that it would not gonna fly, so I actually completely cut it by half. So I will finish it in 50 minutes. Okay, so the topic is the Japan's North Korean policy in the Trump era, and so let me begin with the basic motivation why I got started to study this issue. The key is why that issue? So I know most of you have heard about the issue of the Japanese citizen abduction by North Korea, which happened in the late 1970s and early 1980s. And it was revealed by the terrorist attack by North Korea onto the South Korean passenger plane. And the Kim Hyun-hee, the convict, the terrorist convict, and we confessed that she had been trained by the Japanese citizens. Thank you. And so now that was known to the people, and so that they're known to the people, and then so the North Korea even admitted that they kidnapped, but voluntarily. They actually kidnapped, voluntarily kidnapped. Anyway, so they admitted that, and the Japanese government also they admitted that, even though there is a kind of the mismatch in the numbers of the victims, but we all know that happened, And the Japanese government has been working to address the issue since the early 1990s. And now it's in 2025. And all prime ministers have prioritized the issue of abduction as its top priority of Japan's North Korean policy. Since the day one in the 1990s, all prime ministers, without exception, both from the LDP, the conservative LDP, and the DPJ, the Democratic Party of Japan, they all admit that. But why that issue has not been addressed for more than 4 years? That's the beginning of this study. So despite the unilateral support of the United States, also the United States also showed support for that. And South Korea also showed sympathy about that. Then why that issue has not been addressed? And the North Korea also said that we are ready to kind of cooperate on this issue if kind of proper, appropriate concession is given to North Korea. But that has not worked. So the real Ishiba Shigeru, the current, the prime minister, who has been a kind of long-time advocate of this issue, will be able to break the deal with North Korea. That's the motivation of this study. So that actually is followed by the boring theoretical discussion on the determinants of Japanese foreign policy, and we have actors, structures, and traditions, and let me skip that. And what is important is the trend. What has happened is that in Japanese foreign policy making, the focus, the loci of the foreign policy making has been shifted from the kind of bureaucracy and the LDP politician, but to the prime minister's office. That's so-called the presidentialization of prime minister. So that has happened. And the political parties have been struggling with the declining popular support. We all know that the Ishiba is not a kind of popular leader. And at the same time, there was a growing civil society influence in the policy making since the 1990s. And then the structure has not been changed substantially. The post-Cold War and the rise of US-China hegemony competition and the asymmetric, the US-Japan bilateral relation has been pretty much intact. And this inter-Korean and Japan-South Korean relation also has been influencing the. And then the Abe actually made the kind of shift from the Yoshida doctrine to more kind of pragmatic approach to the more proactive and the more assertive diplomacy. And the pacifist kind of grassroots consensus has been declining. That's the general trend. And then what happened is that Japan has established 3 policy agendas, 3 pillars of the Japan foreign policy toward North Korea. The first one is the nuclear disarmament. That's the number one. The second one is the repatriation of abductees, the resolving of abduction issues. And the final one is the diplomatic normalization. 3 goals have been pursued by Japanese government simultaneously. And that has been happened and established over the past decades in Japan. And what are the major determinants and elements of Japan's North Korean policy? So the scholars have identified that there are 4 motives, like post-war resolution, national security, abduction, and economic cooperation, etc., etc. So let me skip that. And what is important is that the domestic factors, the prime minister leadership and the factional competition and the LDP bureaucratic leadership has all changed, but in a way which giving more power and the power to the prime minister. Now the prime minister is the main driver of the North Korean policy, regardless whether he or she has been supported by the LDP faction members or something. But at the same time, what is important is to underscore is that Japan is still struggling with some kind of economic recession and the anemic economic recovery. So now, this is the main argument of my paper. So when you pursue those 3 goals simultaneously, resolving the abduction issues and making some kind of the denuclearization efforts by strengthening its alliance with the United States as well as South Korea, at the same time, the kind of enhancing Japan's own autonomy, which has been pursued by the current Prime Minister Ishiba, the Japan, as not a kind of the proxy or client of the United States, but as an independent and autonomous state. That was the goal. Since the 1990s, all politicians in Japan pursued a kind of the so-called normalization, the making normal country of Japan, having its own autonomous goals. And when you pursue those three goals together, then you're gonna in trouble. Not because of the Japan's lack of resources or there's something, but mostly because of the unique issue agenda of Japan on North Korea. That's the abduction issues. So let me kind of explain the kind of status of abduction issue in Japan's foreign policy. It emerged as a kind of core political issue since the 1990s, and that was the end of the Cold War, and there was a growing importance of universal values like human rights or something and norms. While in Japan, the domestic politics underwent a substantial change, and many of you may know that the LDP was struggling with the decline in popularity and was on the verge of breakout. And then there was the kind of the anti-LDP alliance emerged. And then the LDP was actually lost power briefly, even before the electoral system reform. And so the power politics were weakened, and the LDP was struggling with a decline in popularity. At the same time, there's right-wing conservative politicians actually picked it up as an issue to justify its kind of nationalistic goals. So, which means that at the early stage of like politicization of this abduction issue in the early 90s, that the politicians who were interested in that issue were mostly pro-North Korean politicians, like socialist and communist politicians who had maintained contact and the links with the North Korea in an effort to pursue normalization. Diplomatic normalization was their primary goal. But as time goes on, the LDP politicians, conservative politicians mostly at the time, including the Koike and the Abe Shinzo, actually they picked it up as a kind of the rationale to justify their kind of conservative, the ideals and agendas. So since then, it has become the top priority of Japan's North Korean policy, replacing kind of the other goals like the diplomatic normalization and in some cases, even the denuclearization. And then there's a substantial different level of commitment, however, on this issue of abduction. All Japanese government have requested support on the abduction issue to all US administration, both from the GOP and the Democratic Party governments, and the Kishida, the previous prime minister, even sought support from Xi Jinping from China on the issue of abduction. But here is the catch. Only Japan is interested in this issue on North Korea, which means that South Korea, China, and United States, they show support, they show sympathy, but they are not committed to that. But once that issue has been established as the kind of top priority of Japan's foreign policy toward North Korea, then you are in trouble. You have to make the other countries committed to that. Okay. Yeah. So what's the Ishiba government is doing is that the Prime Minister Ishiba, as I briefly mentioned, that he is an advocate of collective self-defense and constitutional revision since the days of Ozawa Ichiro in the 1990s. And he was the first chairperson of the new multi-partisan league of lawmakers to resolve the abduction issues. And he was the Director General of the Defense Agency and Minister of Defense, and actually he's the tribal member, Jokugin, the National Defense tribal lawmaker. And he actually pursued equal US-Japan relations, and he wanted to, not sure whether he is still pursuing that goal now, but the amendment of SOFA and the creation of Asian NATO, and he wanted to redefine the status of self-defense forces, and he actually needed for Japan's constitutional amendment and approval from the US administration and Congress. But still, as I mentioned, the Japanese economy is still struggling with economic difficulties and anemic the economic recovery. And then so in the middle of US-China rivalry, so now we have Donald Trump, who might not be really interested in the real values or human rights, even though he said that. And the Abe actually invited Donald Trump and have him meet the family members of the victims. And he said that. Yesterday, Trump said that, okay, so the Abe Shinzo is a good guy and he's going to take care of it. And then, I know Kim Jong-un, and he's going to take care of it, and without looking at the family members, and he always looking at the ground and toward the camera. Anyway, so that's the situation. So finally, we are going to the conclusions. So now we have the challenge to the issue about government's North Korean policy. So you have to resolve the abduction issues. That requires you to make United States committed to it. And on the issue of nuclear missile threat, so you have to secure and tighten the US-Japan alliance. At the same time, you have to make, if that is still the Ishiba's goal, equal US-Japan relationship, then to do that, you have to spend more for the military expansion. And you may have to voluntarily share the defense cost with the United States. You have to pursue those three goals together, which is gonna be a very tough job for the Ishiba. And so that was actually proven some days ago when the Trump and Ishiba met, and Trump talked all about the trade deficit and deficit. And then, as you can see, so Ishiba said that, okay, so how about the abduction issues? And then the Foreign Ministry of Japan released a statement right after the summit saying that Prime Minister Ishiba asked for the continued understanding and cooperation of the United States for the immediate resolution of the abduction issue, and received the full support of the President Trump. That's what, okay, so the foreign affairs, Japan's foreign affairs stated. While the United States President's office simply noted that Japan reiterated its determination to achieve an immediate resolution of the abduction issue, which the United States supported. So we have the conclusion that Ishiba government's foreign policy visions are largely in line with the Abe doctrine, in that he supports the idea of a normal country with assertive democracy and military expansion to proactively enhance Japan's global role. However, his vision differs critically from that of his predecessors, including Abe, in his great emphasis on strategic autonomy. And Ishiba's foreign policy line can be seen as a strategic response to the complicated geopolitical environment surrounding Japan. But when it comes to the North Korean issue, Japan's strategy faces a significant challenge due to the unique agenda, the very abduction issue. They want normalizing, the denuclearization, and the repatriation of the abductees, which could not be addressed consistently. So now that's the final slide. So those countries have different meanings and weight on the abduction issues. It's definitely one of the top agenda. Not one of it. It's the most significant foreign policy agenda for Japan toward North Korea. Japan, it means to legitimize, justify the path toward North Korea amid the lost decades. So it was a kind of the agenda for the conservative Japanese politicians to justify its kind of the military expansion and more aggressive and assertive diplomacy. So now they could say that, okay, so the Japanese government, even though we are the conservative governments, we are pursuing human rights thing, and we want to address those kind of issues. So it has served the purposes. The agenda that satisfies both the conservative nationalism and also the grassroots pacifism. And so, however, for the North Korea, it's not a kind of sympathy. To be honest, it's not a big deal. North Korea is a dictator, the dictator regime, and the missing of the 20-something citizens, they don't care, simply put. So so he used as a bargaining chip for any non-major issues with Japan, and that was happened when Koizumi visited the Kim Jong-il and met Kim Jong-il, but it was unsatisfied by the progress after the Koizumi-Kim summit in the 2000s, and the United States. So it is viewed as basically like a normative issue, and maybe a useful bargaining chip, as in the case of Otto Warmbier case. But the Democratic Party and the GOP have put kind of different weight on this issue. And that's because of that, the Japanese government has kind of the problem in pursuing those three goals together. That's that's the conclusion of my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Kim. Okay, so our next speaker is Professor Haruko Satoh, okay, on Trilateral Security Cooperation.
Thank you. Sorry, I have to change glasses. I can't see. Thank you very much. And also, thank you to the organizers, and also thank you very much to Professor Lampenger for dragging me into another Korea Peninsula related conference. And I have to correct Professor Park. I am not an expert on Korea. I only do what Professor Lampenger tells me that I need to do as a Japanese. So, and also I'm very, very honored to be part of such a very interested and eminent group of scholars, journalists, and students. And I hope I'd be able to give some, well, in a way, a view, nothing factual, not sort of much of an analysis, but a view of how this current post, the Trump 2.0, and the likelihood of this trilateral Japan-ROK US partnership relationship might turn out. It's not so much that I want to predict, but having had the advantage of listening to all the experts preceding me, I've sort of decided to change my presentation a little by making observations and reacting and also commenting on some of the views that were expressed already. But initially, I actually wanted to really, really stress one point about history. And also this region as how it's developing, and there are different phases of historical development between Northeast Asia, even between countries in Northeast Asia, but the Southeast Asia, India, that we live in this post-colonial era. And when we talk about power politics or international relations, confrontational relations, especially between, say, the United States and China, we tend to think that, well, you know, we say that, oh, China's a rising power, but we really don't question how did China get there? What are China's domestic challenges? As if just because China has nuclear weapons, just because China can fly satellites, we don't really question how actually poor the average Chinese can be. We're not talking about a G7 country where, you know, the average sort of the GDP per capita is much, much higher than, say, China or India. These are big countries, and they do have massive consequences on the way that the international political economy will develop. That said, I do think that some of the things, particularly with some of the projects that I've been with Penger, related to China for the past 10, 15 years, is that so many of us tend to neglect to see China, if not in sympathetic eyes, but at least very much more objectively, in terms of how big the country is. And yes, regime survival is the ultimate goal of the Communist Party. And President Xi Jinping, I agree, I don't think he is making things difficult for countries outside that have to deal with China, but I don't think he's making life easy for the Chinese themselves either. But my point is that because I teach sort of identity politics and international relations at Osaka University, and one of the things I really, really stress on is the role of national identity making, nation state making, and how these are actually in phases. We're now entering an era of these post-colonial states finally finding or trying to find ownership and autonomy and how their national identities are formed. But if you go back, so say, I love having conversations with Southeast Asian countries because Southeast Asians are the first to admit that certain things are artificial, that what constitutes the ASEAN states right now didn't look anything like this 200 years ago. There are many, many independent kingdoms, so on and so forth. China, likewise, has a similar story. If you ask anybody, said, okay, what is your Chinese identity? It depends on who you ask and how you ask and where you're looking from. The same token, Korea, we could say the same. Yes, for Korea, being colonized by Japan is very, very much important to how it shapes today's Korean identity. Likewise, we could also say the same of China, that anti-Japan resistance is very important narrative to how the Chinese sees themselves and even tries to sort of gauge relations with Japan. I'm not really talking about how these can be points of, flashpoints of disagreements. The point is that even Japan, when we do approach countries in these nationalistic issues, and this would also apply to the United States as well, is that I think we do need to have some historical perspective on where everybody's identity making, national sort of integrity, or even the idea of the state is either in the phase of being formed, or it's very stable, or it's fragmenting. In the United States, we see Donald Trump as a very authentic, whether you like him or not, a representative of what some realities of the United States is. And in this past year of all these elections, one of the most anticipated results was who was going to become the US president. And I think everybody hoped, most of us hoped, that it would be Kamala Harris. But we're all sort of gawking and balking at, oh my goodness, we have Donald Trump. But I think if you see Donald Trump as a manifestation of something of a state identity, American identity that's fragmenting, doesn't mean the end of it, but, countries' identity come and go. Britain had a crisis over Europe. America has a crisis over, I don't know, wokeism and so on, or rather the changing industrial structure of the country itself. So these are the things that really made me think about after listening to everybody, that maybe it might be a good idea to take a step back instead of trying to predict or react or even to Trump 2.0 as something we really need to be guarded against, but rather to see it in a way that maybe, plug it into our national developments, our sort of political and economic or even social developments, and see what really is so different, what really is the challenge about having Donald Trump or the United States under the helm of Donald Trump. So having said this, just want to make just a couple of points about that I think really is quite important in terms of discussing common strategic interests or security concerns in a grouping like this. And this it'll be predictably about worldviews, also about sort of critically re-examining the binaries. Because Southeast Asia, as everybody knows, one of the best places of hedging, of not wanting to be sort of beholden to either China or the United States, or indeed any other great powers. But at the same time, I think that is not something that, it makes it very frustrating if you're looking for allies and if you want to have partnerships. I have heard from American officials saying it's so frustrating because, ASEAN is a talk shop. They don't want to commit to anything. It's like, well, this is about 10, this is 10, 15 years ago. I also heard from an US aid official saying something similar. But what I think is important is really for the United States also to take a step back and make a realistic assessment of their actual power projection, not in terms of military power, but soft power, image, the likability, appealability of the United States, somebody who's going to, you know, try and organize a world in a way that is good for all of us. America first is a slogan, but then again, we all have Japan first, Korea first. Everybody's about. Nation states are as such. So I don't understand why we have to be balking about why Donald Trump says America first, which is, in a way, we just have to realize that why is it so damaging or so dangerous that America does so? The other thing about, I think, we need to also take back is that this looking at when we're talking about not choosing sides, and the binaries are very dangerous. Democracies versus authoritarianism, China versus US, or now we're sort of thinking about, oh, the Eurasian continent versus the rest of America type of. But I think what my last sort of point that I really, really wanted to make, particularly because it pertains to Japan and Korea, is that Japan and Korea actually make these decisions about whether to be on the American side of certain things, to be on the Chinese side of certain things every single day. This is not these like long-term, longitudinal things that we have a path dependency towards this and then the other. No, the exact geopolitical, geographic nature of the relationship for San Francisco makes Japan and Korea very much conscious of the fact that we have to navigate this every single day as a decision. This is not because we're sort of backstabbing America, but because as go back to history, Japan, Korea, and China have much, much longer cultural, social, historical interactions. There are certain things that are intractable. You can't erase it. You can't even overwrite. So I think this is where what I really would like to see some of the lexicon, as well as the way we phrase things, talk about things, address strategic issues in a way that perhaps is less sensationalized, simplistic, and dramatic, when actually what is happening, perhaps the worrying, for example, factor maybe for American democracy in crisis, the crisis of the United Nations system. These, I think, are really something that perhaps affects us all, rather than trying to sort of see this sort of microscopic view of Asia and seeing these are the power dynamics shifting so and so, and whether how to predict behavior. That is, I'm so sorry, but this is what I sort of reacted to all the presentations I've listened to. And the final, just one last point, very important point about the abductee issue that Professor Kim mentioned. This is a very domestic problem. One of the things that I said in the last time I was here, we have about 600,000 Koreans, ethnic Koreans in Japan, called Zainichi. Some of them are from what's now the north, some of them are from south. And this is a seriously sticky domestic problem that the abductee issue is very much integral to this. So that it is not just the foreign policy priorities, it is a very domestic problem that actually affects both relations with North Korea as well as South Korea. And this is why I think South Korea and Japan collaborating and talking a lot more often is really going to be important and probably a key to how everybody navigates Trump 2.0. Thank you.
very, interesting presentation on the bilateral relations between the Northeast Asian countries during the term 2. And okay, so let me invite the to the talk. And then, okay. So Professor Choo, he may address discontinuity in US-China policy between Trump first term and second terms. Then the Professor Kim Sunil, he emphasized that several important agenda in diplomatic relations negotiations between the Japan and North Korea, including adoption issues. And then it seems to me the professor pressure on Japan and South Korea, okay, with the too much American first policy, okay, may have the danger of the Whither Japan and Korea and United States because of the identity problem. That's when you are arguing? No, okay, I'm sorry. Anyway, okay, you can ask the questions, okay, to Haruko and the Kim Sunil. Okay, let me open our panel to an audience. Okay, we will finish in when okay, we will have about the 30-minute Q&A session. So if you have questions, please raise your hand. Okay, speak to it. Okay, let's go. Okay, you go first. Okay.
Thank you. I have a I have a question for Professor Satoh. I like your presentation very much. So in terms of the national identity or history, as we may know that there are different versions of history textbook and education. So I wonder when, scholars from different country, nations will discuss about this. When I was a student, I know that, in US, most of us try to avoid this kind of topic discussion because you will end up with unhappy everybody. But I don't know so how about scholars like you in terms of this area, how you communicate with each other? Yeah, thank you.
You may
Thank you very much for that question. I'm actually quite proud to say that for the past 10, 15 years, I've been lecturing Kyung-hee students every year when they go to Osaka about our Yasukuni shrine problem. But I also do believe that the history is very important, and this region is very unique in a way that if you try to find a comprehensive book, history textbook on World War II in Asia, you can't find one. It's not like Europe. There's not been a kind of political sort of drive to everybody so reconciliation by understanding and sharing history of that transitional justice hasn't happened. It makes it very difficult. Japan, it has been part of it as a culprit for also having to not adequately address the war guilt issues. But if you look at our archives are so closed still, which makes history very much tied to a lot of the regime's legitimacy, whether it's the Communist Party or, even the LDP actually. So this makes that kind of process of talking about history very important, but at the same time, very difficult to avoid politicization. I had, if it helps, I was once at this Jeju forum with three Koreans, former ambassador to Japan, and 2 other Korean scholars, and it was done in Japanese and Korean. And I said something about, please don't think that, Prime Minister Abe's view of history is the only one because, they're just, that was reported in a newspaper in Japan, and my university got a complaint that I was unpatriotic. So it happens, but I think talking about it is more in a forthcoming way is far more important, rather than trying to sort of set up commissions. But it's a long path, so.
Thank you. Okay, any questions? Other questions? Okay, please, yeah.
Hello, hi, I'm Louis from Public Policy Asia Advisor. I was just wondering, in regard to the abductees issue, is there any reason why hostage exchange is not pursued as a diplomatic tool, even though this has actually been practiced in other countries like, for example, Soviet Union and the US, Russia, and and Hamas, and also in hostage exchange as a diplomatic tool not being pursued? Because I noticed there's a lot of approaches. Sorry?
You're going to exchange.
No, what I'm trying to find out here is why is it not being used as a diplomatic tool, even though there have been other cases in different countries where hostage exchanges actually took place?
Oh,
So if you agree to that as an example which could be pursued, then we can talk about which hostage might be relevant for the purposes of the exchange. But my question really is, why is it not being pursued as a tool to resolve this issue, even though there are other countries who have done it previously? I think there are a lot of examples in the whole thing.
Professor Kim, would you like to go first?
Can I? So now I can speak a little slowly, right? I'm constrained. Okay, so here's the things. The Japanese government has been constantly insisting on some kind of grand bargain with the North Korea. So while the Koizumi wanted to separate the issue, and in return for the economic kind of concessions, he wanted to resolve that issue, and it worked right off the bat. But after that, his followers, mostly the unpopular, the prime ministers, the first Abe government, followed by the Fukuda and Aso, actually that didn't work. That didn't fly. But he wanted to separate that, and that's what North Korea also wanted. But what Abe and the other conservative politicians wanted to, in my view, is that they wanted to use the abduction case as a kind of justification of their own kind of on foreign policy agendas, then including the military expansions and other kind of conservative policies. They to pursue that against the popular oppositions, considering the kind of pretty firm pacifist grassroots tradition, to persuade the people and to ram through the kind of the security legislations and others, the government needed some kind of justification. And the North Korea abduction issue has been served as a kind of good causes for the Japanese government. So because of that, in a sense, instead of resolving that issue that North Korea wanted, they just wanted to bring it up as a kind of issue. So that's why the Japanese government has been trying to link the abduction issue with other two major kind of the policies, the denuclearization and the diplomatic normalization, which basically has some kind of internal contradictions. You cannot pursue those things together simultaneously, but Japanese government has been trying to do that. So in that sense, well, even though the Japanese government has failed to resolve the abduction issues, but in another sense, that actually the abduction issue has been serving its purpose for the Japanese government by rationalizing and by justifying the Japanese government policy. That's basically my view. And Professor Satoh,
I have a different view. So the abduction issue, as they said, is very much a legacy of part legacy of colonization. And the other one is really to do with, well, North Korea, because North Koreans have also abducted South Koreans. So the abduction is basic, but the Japanese, it has a very protracted process by which it was not really picked up as a recognized issue, even by the National Police Agency, until like the 90s. And when the Gaimusho, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, finally recognized that there are these. So people who were the victims or the families of the abductees knew, but whether it was taken up by policy, I mean, it was much, much late. And at the time, when North Korea flew Tepodong over Japan, one of the foreign ministry officials was kind of caught saying that, well, the missile issue is a lot more important than some 11 abductees. So this was in the 90s. This went down badly, obviously. But then when Koizumi-san went over, he went partly because, yes, it was more to do with the missiles and also about the abductees. So he managed to get, I think, 11 people released, and there are still more. What Abe-san did, and I actually do concur with the fact that Abe-san will actually politically instrumentalize this abductee issue, particularly in order to paint North Korea as an impossible, threat. But the other fallout from Abe-san was that he made it into such a corner, sort of one of his signature policies when he was sort of bidding for prime ministership. The sort of humanitarian I care type of thing. Once you have that happen and you see all the faces of the associations of these families who are left behind, you can't drop it, right? As a public sort of policy issue from a PR standpoint, no government can afford to be seen as not doing anything. So that actually stuck to make Japan's position in the six-party talks irreconcilable. Japan, as I wrote in one of them, was a spoiler in all the negotiations, because if Japan's going to say we need an irreversible denuclearization plus return of the abductees, you can't do anything, right? But this was the kind of, I think, legacy of what Prime Minister Abe making it into such a public sentimental issue that in the past 20 years has just been very, very, in a way, unfortunate. I'm not saying that I don't care, but as I said, it's not as simple as bargaining.
I think that, the Professor Kim emphasized that that might be more important, the foreign policy agenda than adoption issue in bilateral relations between Japan and North Korea. But Haruko also addressed that, any foreign policy issue is likely to be constrained, determined by domestic politics, because of some foreign policy experts argue that, foreign policy is just the continuation of domestic politics. So I think adoption might not be, seen as the top priority issue from the perspective outsider, but to Japan, maybe one of the most important foreign policy issue in bilateral relations between North Korea and Japan, maybe. Okay, yeah. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, I agree with you. Okay, sure. Okay. So, any question to Professor Jaewoo? Sorry. Okay. Okay, Mr. Okay. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm Paul Evans. I'm a professor from the University of British Columbia and a visitor here at the EAI. And I'm struck by trying to connect what Bilahari Kausikan said in his opening remarks today, where he made some provocative predictions about where things might play out in the Trump era, which I think are going to directly affect the triangle that is the discussion here. And Bill, made two fundamental predictions. One is that we have to deal with North Korea as a nuclear state that is not particularly interested in unification at this stage, but a nuclear state. But second, even more provocatively, was his suggestion that the only logical response to this situation was Japan and South Korea also developing nuclear weapons. This has been a discussion in the region for many years. But there's something new to it that was embedded in Mr. Kausikan's question. And that is that the calculation on nuclear strategies depends upon trust of the United States, in the United States, under Donald Trump. Coming as a Canadian at this particular moment, I would say that trust in the United States and trust in Donald Trump is at least in question and almost seen as a new existential threat to us in our nationhood and some other matters. But I put it to you on the matter of distrust of the United States and whether this is going to change the triangular dynamics that you're talking about from different angles.
So please, you may respond to, yeah. Come on. Japan.
Well, okay, so basically, thank you, Paul, for that question. I also had a lot of question marks going up. I think that assumption that both Korea and Japan have to go nuclear is dangerous, for one. But at the same time, I think all diplomats in South Korea and Japan have been putting a lot of energy, as you know, in trying to make America appear trustworthy. And that's the key of how the extended nuclear umbrella works. Because both countries have plenty of anti-US, anti-alliance sort of views and groups. So I think in that sense, what you raise is very painful. I don't know what to say, but I do think that given what Trump has been doing in terms, not in terms of NATO, but what it's done already in Korea and Japan in his first term, and how sort of gauging what he thinks of Japan after meeting Ishiba, I think that might not be, well, I don't know, I think it might be less affected that America's suddenly going to pull out the commitment to defending South Korea and Japan. And what Jaewoo and I were talking actually earlier in the coffee break is that, well, we actually produce things. With a transactional America, we can transact. But not to sort of, I'm not sure, but I think it's something everybody has to think. I'm not saying that it won't happen, but we do need to think seriously about this at high levels. But if Victor Cha's promise of having good Asia hands, who knows?
Okay, Professor Choo,
Yeah.
you can say something.
Okay, well, thank you, Professor Evans. I remember you. Yeah, we met like 10 years ago. Yeah. I wonder who you were. Okay, we met 10 years ago or so. Yeah. Yeah, the level of trust in Trump is definitely important because, considering his personality and the way he is, that's for sure. But I like to look at it in a larger context, not because I'm a supporter of the trilateral cooperation. I think it's about time, and I think we have the momentum, and I like to see the momentum carry on. But at the same time, in a larger context, in the context of Indo-Pacific strategy, I don't think the level of trust in Trump could really interfere with the, path that these three countries want to take on the trilateral cooperation to the next level. Well, just like who was it? Victor Cha said, yeah, domestic politics also matters too among the three countries, and I guess should Korea have an early election and who knows, going to get elected. But if the Progressive Party leader gets elected, who knows, that could put the trilateral cooperation in danger. So a lot of things to be seen, but I would say the momentum is still there. And I don't think Trump himself alone cannot stop that momentum. That would be my personal view. Thank you.
Professor Kim, do you have any comments on the forever? No. But I think Trump also want to strengthen the trilateral, security cooperation or cooperation for U.S. strategic goals in the Pacific region. That is to check broadly China. However, but as Victor pointed out, Choo pointed out, if there is a domestic political issue in three countries compared to South Korea, should progressive political process win the election, in coming presidential election this year, who are likely to be pro-China or pro-North Korea, then maybe Trump may bypass South Korean government, progressive South Korean government, in Indo-China strategies, so that will create some kind of frictions and schisms in trilateral security cooperation, I think. I don't know. Okay, so next question. Okay, my dear Chen Kang and Director, you have already privileged to speak first. Okay. Yeah, sorry. Okay, Chen Kang. Okay.
Thank you, Chen Kang from
Because
EAI.
okay, we have only 5 minutes, so
Yeah, very quick. Yeah. So question to Jaewoo. Yeah.
Question 1 minute.
Only one question. Yeah. Only one question. Yeah. Recently, we have seen some significant improvement of relationship between Korea, South Korea, and China. So you are expert on the Korea and China issues. Can you elaborate on the main driving forces behind this kind of improvement? Thanks.
This is Choo.
Main driving forces for our reason.
You want to respond to after hearing all 3 questions? Shall we do that? Okay. Okay. Here. Okay.
Yeah. According to various public opinion survey in the Republic of Korea, around 70% of the population, of the adult population, are in favor of South Korea becoming a nuclear power to acquire its own deterrence against the DPRK. It is not inconceivable that the Trump-Kim summit may not take place at all in Southeast Asia, right? Or even if there is another Trump-Kim summit in Singapore or in Hanoi, nothing may not come out of it. No workshops, nothing, no follow-up. So that being the case, may I ask both of you, what do you think is the possibility of South Korea going nuclear, mutual assured destruction, MAD, with North Korea, and whether this will be really a game changer in Northeast Asia? Okay, thank you.
Okay, your question.
Almost feel bad because I'm looking at the time. Just one quick question. A lot depends on this transactional approach between Trump and the counterparts. My question is whether this puts especially Japan, Korea, but a lot of places, probably also in Europe, at a humongous disadvantage at this particular time, because it seems that what Trump really is looking forward to, either to have somebody that is very strong or perceived to be very strong. What we see now is that the leadership in Japan, most likely what's come out of South Korea, is very, very weak. And that undermines the ability to really negotiate. If you look, for example, at the meeting between Modi and Trump, you can see that they're at the same level. I would not be surprised if the discussion at the end of the day between Putin and Trump is at the same level. But you wouldn't have that in this part of the world. And that means you walk into this dialogue very, very weakly. And that differs from previous administrations because all of the discussion initially took place at the level of the bureaucracy, administrations, and then only at the very end it would be elevated to the leaders. But this time around, it is flipped around, and I think it puts it at a disadvantage.
Okay, one of the major forces, driving forces behind the improvement in Sino-Korean relations, I would say probably it's because I think China's running out of time. China is suffering big time in terms of its economic difficulties and needs to try to, improve relationship with as many countries as possible, especially when it comes to high-tech areas and so forth. So economic cooperation is definitely one of the main reasons. And to your question, Pangera, I oppose, nuclear armament of Korea. I recently wrote an article in Korean. Okay, the survey is misleading. Okay, if you ask us, should we nuclear arm ourselves? Yes, 70%. Despite the cost of, sanctions and, as a result of, defecting NPT, then the approval rate goes down to half, 35%. And if I were to raise another questions to Korean public, despite the cost that you're willing to pay as a taxpayer for the maintenance of the nuclear warheads and delivery system, then I would say probably close to nil. Yeah. So they don't talk about the real economic, costs that we would have to bear in addition to, political costs, just, undermining the ROK-US alliance and so forth. And to your question, sir, I would say, like I said, for weaker states like Koreans, we have to elevate ourselves when we walk into the White House. we have to walk in as if we were, giant panda too, I'm a big boy. I'm a big boy, right? Elevate ourselves because should you understand better of, the weak points and the strength of ourselves and the weak points of the United States, I think that we could be on equal terms. Yeah.
Okay. And then you.
Survey is also misleading in another sense that it asked if North Korea does not give up its nuclear power, what South Korea has to do. And in responding to that question, so the 70% of the Korean people said we have to go nuclear. And in the same survey, the South Koreans, 35% of South Koreans supported Japan's going nuclear as well, which means that the survey questionnaire was a little bit misleading in that sense. And about the South Korean nuclear armament itself, but it's more about South Koreans kind of declining trust in the United States and the provision or the provision of the nuclear umbrella.
Okay.
I think going nuclear, both Japan and Korea, the people who are asking about whether we should, they don't know, as Jaewoo said, the cost of maintaining nuclear weapons, verification processes. Do you want to be like, and we all have nuclear power stations, and they should know that with nuclear weapons, it goes higher. The problem with policymakers is that they don't tell you that. And as Japan, as is the only bomb victim countries, I think Japan really should make it much more explicit how costly and dangerous a game that we engage in just by talking casually about going nuclear. And on the final point from the director about weak states, weak politics, I actually don't think that the Japanese or the Korean leadership might be weak because it's not like, Korea has a presidential system. We have a prime minister, parliamentary system. But I don't necessarily think that Ishiba-san's government is particularly weak. Rather, he's gone hands-on all hands on deck, even inviting the opposition to work on the government, on government committees. So I think he's sort of pretty much, it's not a weak government like some of the other prime ministers we've had. And so in that sense, I think both Japan and Korea have demonstrated democratic resilience compared to what some of our Western allies are going through. So in that sense, I wouldn't worry, or I wouldn't sort of judge too much in that direction. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, as far as the nuclearization of South Korea is concerned, I think there's a very important factor to consider. That is domino effects. Domino effects of the South Korean nuclearization, which means that if South Korea go nuclear, Japan will go nuclear, Taiwan will go nuclear. It was kind of, drive East Asian into kind of nuclear Armageddon. So very dangerous situation. Okay, that's okay. Anyway, let me stop here. Okay, thank you very much for your wonderful presentation and answers. Okay, thank you. Okay, and also thank you very much for joining us for this session. Okay, thank you.